Hello and welcome to our next video. In this video, we're going to finally dig into Elastic and create our first detection based off of the activity that we generated in our previous video. Okay, so just to start and to get everyone orientated, we are in the Discover tab under Analytics. The big question is when you're looking into certain kinds of new activity is how exactly do we narrow down this very large data set into something usable? Okay. So first off, that I like to do is look at the different data sources present in the activity. For example, right here, we have event.dataset. If it's not already in your popular fields, you can search it here. And if you click it, you'll see you'll get a nice split of all the top values for the data sources contained within this event.dataset. Okay. Since we're looking at HTTP traffic and all of our scanners are hitting that HTTP server, we're going to use the zeek.http, but this is all helpful and will guide where to pivot next, okay? So we're going to focus just on zeek.http. So we can say, something like this, okay? And now we get all our Zeek HTTP data. And this view, while verbose, you get the full document field here. We want something a little bit more descriptive for us, okay? So once you get into a specific data set, what you want to know next is what fields you care about. So let's open up one of these logs, and let's kind of go through this step by step here. So when thinking about IP traffic, source IP, destination IP stand out to me, maybe source port, destination port. Okay, so what we can do is if you hover over any given field, and this section right here, toggle column and table, we can start adding the columns that we care about. And now let's go to source IP. All right, so we got our source IP information. We got our destination IP information. What else is in here? We have some port. We already know that the destination port is always 8000, so I'm not going to add that to our view quite yet. We can see get. So if we see a get versus a post, that might be something we're interested in, okay? And scrolling through these logs, we can see the URL path. That's interesting because it knows what's getting targeted on the web server. And the user agent is also interesting because that typically fingerprints the browser that is being used to access the web server. And what's interesting, we can see that Nikto is advertising itself in the user agent. Okay. And we'll get more into that in a second here. But outside of that, these are the fields that we care about for this log. Okay, so let's go back to our data. Now we have a nice even view here. And what we can do is reorder these. Shrink the field down to make it more presentable. Okay. And this is something I would use to look at the data at a more high level. So we can see GET requests, the source, the destination, on what path, and what user agent triggered the activity. Okay. And this helps us paint a nice clear picture without going to each log individually, which as you can see by this hit count, that would take an awful amount of time to try to get a feel for what's going on in here. Okay. So as alluded to before, this Nikto text within the user agent string is very interesting. It's something we're going to hone in on in a little bit here. But before we focus right on Nikto, what we can do is click this field statistics button. Let this generate. And if you look at user agent.original here, we could see all kinds of different user agent strings occurring here, right? And the question is, Nikto is the common theme here, but what about activity in which Nikto is not present in the logs? And let's say we want to dig more into this other category. Okay, and now what we're doing is filtering out the Nikto text within the user agent. Okay. And what we get is that other value that we saw earlier, which was a large amount of queries. But if we look at it, it boils down to only a handful of different user agent strings. So we see a lot on this specific string, and I'll give it away for the sake of demonstration, but this is our OWASP Zap scanner. Okay. And then we have our Nmap scripting engine, which is also advertising itself very similar to the Nikto user agent. And what we have here is our Firefox browser from Parrot OS. So this is from us just browsing that web server, clicking around, looking at the documents folder, looking at that test file.txt. Okay. So let's say we want to alert on Nikto and Nmap user agent strings. Okay. We can consider this alert a port and web application scanner kind of alert. So what we can do is something very similar to what we have here. We're looking for Nmap. And we're going to get rid of this not because we only want to see values from Nikto and Nmap. Okay. And we have Nikto present. If we wanted to make sure that our logic's working here, and we can do something like this just to make sure that Nmap is triggering how we want it to. So we could add Nikto into this logic. Now we have all our data in here. So now that we have built our query to trigger on the Nmap and Nikto scanning activity, we can create this as an alert. And what we're going to do is go into our security tab here and then into manage. We can click rules. We're going to create a new rule. It's going to be a custom query. Index patterns, we can leave this as default. This KQL syntax, we're going to copy and paste from our search here. Okay. And what we want to add in is some suppression. Why that is we have almost 12,000 hits here based off our search. And if we don't add suppression in, that's going to create 11,820 individual alerts for the response team, theoretically. Okay. So what we want to do is add in a reasonable alert suppression. So what we're going to do is suppress based off of the destination IP. Okay. And why that is, if this source IP is also scanning another destination IP, then we want an alert to trigger on that as well. We can't suppress by the source. We want to suppress on just the destination. So if the source IP is scanning 5 different hosts, and we want to alert on each of those activity, okay, we want to make sure that we have to set that appropriately in here. So we're going to suppress on destination IP. And we're going to do per time period, okay? So we're going to run this alert every 5 minutes over the past 5 minutes. So we're going to also set the suppression for a 5-minute time period, okay? Going into name, we could really name this whatever we want, all right? Let's call this maybe it's web scanner activity, Nmap and Nikto, something simple. And into text out of the box, Nmap and Nikto user agent strings. Okay. We can keep this as a low, keep the severity as is, and click continue. So we're going to schedule this to run every 5 minutes over the past 5 minutes. Okay. We're not going to do any fancy actions here. We're just going to create and enable the rule. And what's interesting is if we go into the rule settings, you have this rule preview here. And what you can do as you're creating your rule or as you're testing your rule that you already created, you can go into the rule settings and run the alert over a given time frame. All right, and let's run this alert over the past 2 days. Now that we turn back, if we scroll down here, we can see that this rule would have triggered. Okay. And that's really all we're looking for, just to make sure that the logic works. And then going back into the alert, we could look at some details here. But if you'll notice, we're missing something pretty crucial here. We're missing MITRE information. This information is actually in the About section under Advanced Settings, which we skipped earlier. And we're going to add this optional field in here. Okay, so let's look at MITRE. And when thinking about port scanning and web application scanning and the capacity that we've done in our previous video, I would consider that more discovery as a tactic. Okay, so we can select discovery. And for technique, if you're not too familiar with MITRE right off the bat, it's helpful to kind of click into each of these individually, get a feel for what they are, what they're looking for, etc. But I'll save us some time here and go down to network service discovery. If we read the description here, adversaries may attempt to get a listing of services running on remote hosts and local network infrastructure devices. Okay, common methods to acquire this information include port and/or vulnerability scans using tools that are brought onto a system. Doesn't 100% work with how Nmap is working, right? Because we're not importing Nmap onto the target and then running that executable. But based off of what this is looking for, network service information, we're going to get that information off the host. Okay, so we're going to use that as our technique here. Not everything aligns exactly to what MITRE says. Sometimes we just have to find the closest tactic and technique that makes sense based off the activity. Okay, and we can save that. And if you'll notice, that populates right in here. We can click on each of these and it'll bring us right to the tactics and techniques. And that concludes our first detection. All right. In the next video, we are going to create another detection based off of thresholding. And then we're going to perform our test again and then seeing if our detections worked. Thanks for sticking with me. I'll see you in the next video.